probably blew out your fucking eardrums. So yeah, so I guess to preface this, this could be like one of two. And I want to hold off on the testing for a little bit just because we've got a couple other things actually I think I want to go through. Hang on a second. What's up, baby?
They're really, really clean and white.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Did you repaint it?
No, I just watched it.
Oh.
All right. Once you go back up with mommy, I'm going to do my class, okay? I love you. Don't throw pine cones. I'll edit this out. I totally don't. All right, so yeah, so like this is going to be like part 1 of 2. I'm not going to do a whole bunch of science on this stuff, I guess, for the recording anyways. If you want to talk about it when we're done with the fucking initial thing, that's fine. Cool. But we're going to try to have this much more directed and, as everyone said, crayon eating level. So let's go back here. All right.
Am I a Marine? I'm confused.
Why is this fucking screen thing pop up here? Let's do that. And then that. I want to just like hide you. There we go. Okay, so stuff today. We're going to keep building on the idea of gradients, right? Like how things will move from dark to light or light back. And couple of different ways of dealing with this. I threw up that lighthouse thingy that we just did because you had noticed something pretty interesting, which was the rake lines for the shading.
Yep.
When using a mag. So when we think about like last week, we were talking about hatching and how like when you start putting them closer together and you get more of them, it makes things darker. That was like literally how that entire tattoo was built.
Yep.
Right. Have you compared?
I've seen that before.
Yeah.
I saw that before in like a Japanese wave that I was like, you just did mag drags.
Yeah.
And the guy was like, I'm a wizard. And I was like, you just like
you did a fundamental technique and you're like, bam, check out this shit.
Yeah. And I was like, you did your job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the difference between the mag drags and the smooth shading on the like bottom part there with that almost halfway done fucking thing, but it's the only picture I had that was like recent. I didn't want to go digging through my photo library. As that's layered technique of gradations, right? Where I'm fanning over top of something to make a bunch of variations inside of it. So you can see just like the level of trauma compared to the skin, because that's like relatively the same type of skin tone that's there. But the level of trauma that's exerted on the body, you can just tell right off the hop is far less with one compared to the other, right?
Yep.
Okay. So we're going to read out loud for the visually impaired here. Creating dynamic transitions in art is easy. Psych. The skin comes a little bit more difficult, especially when you have only been taught a single way to apply gradients to design. To start understanding gradation, we need a little practice. First, with the medium off of the skin, which I showed this to my wife, and she goes, yeah, you should probably do this on paper first. And then with the practical application on skin. So last week we were talking about building our tones so that we're teaching our eyes to understand tone, right? So we can see those small variations, and we're trying to create something that is like what is being presented, right? And we were going down in scale, like we're reducing the amount of material that was on the paper, which was creating a lighter shade, right? So
yes,
but like a couple weeks ago, we were talking about that application circle, TM, where you can pick a spot inside of the circle, and as long as you're working in one way, like throughout it, in any direction, then you can kind of like influence how the design is going to go. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And we had started with like doing a drawing and having 5 different copies of it or whatever, 6 different copies, and starting it at different points there within and seeing how it finished. And each time you had started with something different, the image looked totally fucking different, right?
Yep.
So when we're thinking about this stuff, where we're going like from dark to light every single time, it's fine if you're trying to train your eye to go from dark to light, which would be like, this would be really good practice if you're going to be working, traditional designs or even like neo-tradi type stuff. But when you get into doing things like realism, practicing and calibrating your eyes this way can kind of be detrimental. So you've got to think about coming at it the opposite way, which is what this. Oh, good job, papers. So yeah, we talked about this, blah 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 blah. So let's mess with the approach instead of like coming down with this. Okay. Anyways, so instead of going dark to light, we can swap the approach and go light to dark. Training our eyes to approach gradation from multiple points enables you better identification of tone. Let's make it more difficult by removing those pesky blocks. So that's one thing why it was like really isolated with that first practice, is that we had discrete sections wherein you're just trying to like create these abrupt ends between different tones so that you're just like able to calibrate your eye to those settings, right?
Yeah.
So this time what we're going to be doing on paper is we're going one smooth motion. We're trying to create an actual gradient from light to dark, starting at the top of a block, moving your pencil evenly side to side all the way through, and ending at the bottom with a dark, right? A big thing is that when people normally do this, what they do is they're going to start with the dark maybe at the top or the light at the top, whatever. Whenever they get to the one section where it's like lighter, they tend to have really narrow like strokes, because it's not just about like the pressures lightening up, their motions lightening up as well. So they'll start with like these really dark, broad ones, and it pyramids out into this triangular shape where the bottom is, very dark or very light or whatever. And it doesn't look very even, actually, right? We want to see a tone map that we're doing like this, like a gradient line that is evenly spaced all the way down. So that's why I made these boxes rather than saying you have to do it like this. It's just like fill the box. You go from side to side, see if you can negotiate this and make it, straight. When you're doing it, you're not going to pick up your pencil. You're just going straight, like right through, right from the start, all the way down until the bottom where it's fully filled. When you get down to the bottom, you have to make sure that you don't burnish the paper, right? Remember what burnishing is?
Bad. Burnishing is bad.
That's where you've applied so much pressure and force to the medium that you're using, which would be graphite in this case, that you change its optical properties, making it start to reflect and refract light, and it becomes shiny.
Don't let it get shiny.
Don't let it get shiny. So the actual practice sheet is a lot more simple than doing like full page things that are going to be mapping through, right? Mm-hmm. And that's something I thought would be kind of easy just to do this. It's really simple. You can do like a row a day, you know what I mean? And just practice on making those look even. By the time that you're done, I mean, literally at one line should look almost like it's a straight gradient all the way through with just little lines breaking it up. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Don't cheat and just do like one fucking solid line all the way down the page. But anyways, so that's the practice, right? It's just building off the stuff we talked last week, where we're trying to understand what tone is, and we're trying to identify or be able to identify quickly visually what we're seeing and match it to a specific tone as our output with a pencil, right? Now the problem with this when we translate it to tattooing is that
this page was awesome to look at.
What?
This page was awesome to look at.
Oh, yeah. The problem that we have with this stuff when we get into it is that we're utilizing pressure with a single medium to influence how dark or light that something is, and we can't do that with tattooing. I mean, you can, but most people now float their needles and they use rotaries and their stretch is inconsistent. So when you go in to try and use pressure, what happens is you either don't put it in deep enough and it fades away, or you put it in so deep that it explodes and it turns into little mini shotgun blasts, right? And that's dangerous because one, skin is completely inconsistent. Like it's never just like a piece of paper where it has the same thickness all the way through. There's variations in it. It's thicker in some spots and thinner in others. And depending on how you stretch it, those cells and the connective tissues underneath are going to aggregate themselves in a way that can influence how deep the needle can go. So while you can use pressure, it's not the most efficient way of doing this stuff, especially if you're trying to do single pass anything, right? So people figured this shit out, and that's why they started making washes.
Mm.
And we talked about this before, right? Like a wash is an approximation of particle density, or like how much you actually have in that bottle, right? Like black, to show black, has to have a certain amount of pigment in it to look black. If it is washed out, or there's more fluid, carrier fluid or water or whatever added to it, then it spreads those particles of pigment apart, allowing more light through, which just ends up turning things gray. This is why we call them gray washes, right? And we had calibrated our pens before on this, where we had everything set to like certain values, right? Where we had like 50 and 75%. And when we went over them, then it created those blocks that we knew we wanted to try and achieve. So you can think about those mix ratios as actually what quantity of pigment versus additive fluid, right, is actually going to be there. So if we have 25% pigment to 75% carrier fluid, we're going to end up with a total value that is light in comparison with something that has 75% pigment and 25% carrier fluid, which is going to be relatively dark, especially when it heals out long term, right?
Yep.
So there's an issue with it though, because if you try to go in and do single pass stuff with this, because the skin's inconsistency and because most people who are going to be doing this practice, they haven't calibrated their eyes to know exactly what's going on or what they're looking for as that output, you're going to need to actually like build those tones, right? So a lot of people nowadays will sit there and they pendulum shade or whip shade or move things back and forth over top of the space multiple times to slowly increase the amount of pigment that's going into the skin, so it's coming up and meeting that tone that you want.
Which isn't that the same thing as burnishing the paper?
Basically, yeah, that'd be a really good equivalent, dude. Yeah, that's a great analogy. By doing that, if you keep going over it and over it and over it and over it, you're just destroying the skin's ability to hold pigment. So you're increasing the chances of scarring. And there's only a certain amount of pigment you can stick in there at the same time. So when you start really low and there's a lot of wash fluid in there or a lot of carrier fluid, then what happens is you're just injecting that into the skin, and it's going to hypersaturate that space. That carrier fluid is going to be like absorbed into the body or pushed out during healing, but it still blocks the space for which pigment can actually enter into the skin. So the more time you're going over top of it, the less likely that you're going to actually get any pigment going into it. And it's just going to start chewing it up more and more. You have to then actually chew up the skin to release some of that carrier fluid so you can try to put in more pigment. By then, the actual structure of the skin is so degraded that it's not going to be able to hold anything. A lot of it's just going to end up bleaching out. Was that too much?
So, so by that logic, it would be better to learn how to just manipulate the solid black and not the gray wash.
Well, no, you can use the washes. It's just you have to know how to apply things in a single pass fashion so that you know what your desired output is, right? Like
So you're not
building
just
tones.
scrubbing the skin.
Yeah, like you can build tones. Like you can totally do it, but you have to understand that every single time you pass over top of it, if you don't meet that tone, you're going to be causing a greater amount of trauma to the skin, which is going to reduce the amount of pigment that's in it when it heals, right? If I go over something 16 times and I try to achieve tone X, and it reaches a certain amount, should I pull up a slide here so we can fucking see this shit? There we go. Let's do this. I'm not soft brush. So if I have my skin and I'm going over top of it with my tattoo machine here, right? Beep, 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 beep. And I'm trying to get to some value. We'll call this, right, value X. The more times that I go over top of it, the more that the skin is going to end up getting chewed up. And the more likely, because the structure's been broken down, that this stuff is going to end up falling out. It's just going to, because the body's going to need to repair more, right? Yep. If I can achieve that same value X, right, with one pass, the amount of pigment that's going to be in there is going to stay more because there's less trauma to the skin,
Exactly.
right?
Yes.
Okay.
Look at her.
So one way to get around this is like if you know you're going to be building up to it, because more often than not, when you're doing a, let's grab this thing. When you're doing a tonal map, right, and you have it on your,
And pink and purple.
you have on your, here, this is gonna be hard to do this class there again. She wants to be a part of it though. It's fun. Yeah. When you're doing stuff, normally what we're doing is we're trying to think of like light to dark, but when we're doing our building up with our pendulum swings, where it's just going back and forth and causing trauma, we're actually building it up from light to dark, right? Where we're trying to go along that value until we reach like this point where it's like, oh, this is where we think that it's going to be when given it to like our reference, you know, points, which is like right here or whatever. And we're trying to match it. So by slowly building it up, by doing pass after pass after pass, we're moving the bar technically. Like this would be one pass, right? First. The second one, we're getting a little bit further, further because we're using the same washes, right? And we're trying to think about this stuff as like incrementally building up to that point that we have. And this is like 6-ish passes by using the same amount or the same wash. Because like the actual wash that we're using the entire time has a set number of particles of pigment in it, right? If we have an ink cap that has 15% in it, when we go to put it in the skin, we've got our 15%, and then we hit it again, and we're adding another 15% to it, and we hit it again, and we're adding another 15% to it. It's slowly going to keep getting darker and darker, right?
Yeah.
That's why every time that you pendulum swing, you're putting something in, you're getting stuff that isn't actually going to stick, stuff that's settled right, stuff that's relatively darker, and this is dark, this is right, and this is wrong. But it's inconsistent. So with all this stuff, especially if it's moving back and forth, what you're doing is creating a whole bunch of basically like dots, right? Where some are like really dark, some are lighter and they move out. And we're just creating this tone map where if we start with this being darker, right? And we're coming off of it, making it lighter as we move out, we have this gradation that we're applying to the skin and little swatches, very, very small. If we take those, and we overlay them, let me do that back, combine down, there we go. And we combine them so that they are random in their overlays. We are technically just building that tone map over and over and over until we have that darkness that we're trying to achieve, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in doing that, we end up really damaging the skin. And
So is there ever,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, is there ever a time where doing that is what you want to be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. If we go, let's just drop this one down here and we'll add another one there. Let's say that you are doing some shading here, right? Let's say you've got some gradient that you've created coming over, right? And you maybe didn't make it as long as you needed to. I need to maybe come out to about here. So you decide to come back in, you know, this is maybe a little bit overworked. So you start like here, and then you start fanning off your stuff and making it lighter as it comes out. And you end up with this pocket that's all munched up, right? What you do is that pendulum stuff. Let's just do this. Boink, duplicate. Sorry, this is just all messed up. And there. You take that pocket that you've created and you can fan back over top in that spot and create a space where you have effectively blended both sides. It's hollow patching. So if you have like block A that's dark and block B, that's dark, but the space in between is less. By having that pendulum motion come in that space, you know you're going to have full saturation in that block that you're trying to fill in, and it's going to fan out, moving on the opposite sides. Right?
Okay.
That's just to blend those gaps. That's really, really useful when you're trying to do something like color budding. If I have color red, I have a bunch of red here, and I'm trying to blend it off to a fucking violet, right? And I've got two budded colors over top here. If I find a color that is somewhat in between, I can do that fan over top and have the center be nice and saturated while I blend that secondary color over top the other ones, and it'll make a nice even transition between the pair.
Oh. Nice.
Yeah. Or you can also do the same thing if you're trying to do like soft and hard edges with color or with black and gray. Having that motion where it's going to fan back and forth, you know that there's going to be the most saturation in the center because your hand is lifting off. It's like whip shading, just at the same speed, right? Back and forth. You know, when you whip shade, you're bringing your machine from a center point up and out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're getting like good saturation here, and it lifts up and it gets less and less and less as it moves up. With the pendulum thing, you're literally just doing it back and forth. So you're whipping one way, and then you're whipping the other, and the center is the only spot that's actually going to be fully saturated. So if you have things like on a nose, you've got like a nose where, whoop, you know, it's coming around, and we want to have that soft edge on the outside here, but we know that we have a bit of a shadow line on there. Doing your pendulum swings back and forth over top of this can help build that up really, really easily, right?
Oh.
Right. Or if you have like
Yeah.
a hard block space like this where you're trying to actually like shade off to do that, you would whip off this, right? You just whip down, that'll make that bridge there. But if we're trying to have something that looks like it's contoured, it has a very soft edge rather than one that's defined, that pendulum stuff will be one of the best ways to apply it.
Cool.
Yeah. Did that answer that all right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Boink. Where are we at? Oh yeah, okay. So I'll read this out, I guess, too. Choosing a wash that's less value needed artist, build up the pigment level of the skin, slowly bring the value up to the fire. Practicing value mapping onto paper will train your eyes to find the value you're looking for. That's because, like I said, when you're working your way up that gradient scale and you're slowly building it with your whatever type of shading, you're trying to create an approximation in the skin without creating a ton of trauma. That is like, this tone that I see is the same as this tone I am creating, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's fine to do that, and it can work, but if your needles aren't at the right fucking depth, all you're doing is just messing stuff up, right? You remember the one that we had last week? I'll just pull it up here. Where we had this.
Yep.
Remember? Where there's like a limit to those ranges of motion where we have our depth being, you know, certain points and others.
Yep.
Yeah. If it's not set to the right depth, then you're just going to end up having stuff that just peels out and fades away. So you have to be sitting there very, very intentionally. Remember, we keep talking about like doing this with intention, going into the depths that you know are required to implant the pigment, and then like allowing them to fan out and soften up as they come in, as you slowly build that stuff up. So yeah, having the proper depth ensures values created will stay constant as the tattoo initially heals and ages into the future. This is extremely difficult for one and done tattoo applications, especially if you're using that pendulum motion. It's easier to get a wash, treat the wash like you're packing color, right? Like if I have yellow, and I know that, let's do that paper here. Let's do red. If I have red and I know I need to do a swatch of red, that's not red, that's fuchsia pink. Ooh, goodness gracious me. There we go. Here's red. If I have red and I'm trying to put in red, I will pack this like I mean it, right? Yo. So why is this different than 70% wash?
Um, it's spelled different.
So if we apply it the same way, realistically, we know when this is going to go into the body that we should have a 70% tonal value applied to the skin.
Which is a medium gray, which it should be. Yeah, you're right. Should be the same.
Right? So most people don't do that because they're afraid of making a mistake. And because like modern commercial blacks that are made have all of these different surfactants in it. So we have varying pigment loads when we go through. If we create a swatch and we drop our stuff painted onto here, whatever, right? We're going to see chunks that are darker next to like maybe lines that are a little bit lighter. And there's going to be a lot of variations inside of this. So you're going to have this uneven pattern where we've got something that maybe is like really dark, and then, it'll be a little bit lighter here and a little bit darker. And so when you are looking at it and it's, healed or whatever, it has all these choppy bits and stuff inside of it that don't look really consistent. So people see this, right? And then they're like, oh shit, you didn't fucking do it right. Well, it's like, well, no, you fucking didn't do it right. But if your eyes are trained to see this stuff when you're filling in, you know how you can go back in and pick out these spaces, right? And be like, okay, I've got a pendulum swing over top of this to create a little bit of a blend, right? And even it out. I've got to do this, that. It's what you're doing then is you're creating your maximum values. You've already established them. And then you have something right next to it that you can be like, I need to make this tone match that one. And this is pretty easy to see. If I have something on a piece of paper over here and I'm trying to tone match something over here, that distance is going to make it way more difficult for me to get things looking the same, right? So me personally, I prefer going and treating this like a color, packing it like I mean it, and then knowing that if I do one pass, that's the tone that I'm going to end up with. So anything that is lighter than that, all I'm going to do is just build that tone up to match the existing tone that's there. If I have any spots that are super fucking dark, then I've made a mistake, and oopsie, that's going to start screwing with the design. That's why, but that's why people don't fucking do that anyways. Yeah. So yeah, people want to avoid going too dark, which reduces confidence in their application of stroke. And the confidence thing is a big thing, right? When you go to do things with intention, you are understanding that there is a specific outcome that you are aiming for. And in tattooing, there's no guarantee that will happen. So you have to be confident in as many of the variables as you can, right? My stretch, my machine speed, my needle depth, my lighting, right? Like all of those other things you can be confident in, but everyone's skin is always just like, Jesus, make this work. Oh my God, maybe. Right? So if you control those variables, like, like my black is going to be a 70% wash and won't get any darker. I mean, 99% of the time that'll be true if you're doing single pass stuff. But every once in a while, you're going to have a pocket where somebody has maybe like a little bit extra keratin. Maybe there's like a hollow spot. Maybe there's like a scar that you can't really see. And you're going to put it in there and that shit's going to get way darker than what you expected.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fun, especially if you're doing like a baby portrait and all of a sudden the kid's got freckles and shit, So
suddenly has a very hard nose.
Yeah, exactly. And then you end up having to darken the entire piece to meet with that, which is even more difficult. A lot of people will just be like, rather than just letting it heal and come back and lighten and then try to do it, they'll try to polish it up at the time instead of just saying, oh, I made a mistake. I didn't expect this to happen. Don't worry, I can fix it.
Mm.
So everyone to fix this has come up with this pendulum swing where you're using just random actions to slowly build stuff rather than just like doing it the other way. I mean, the outcomes, as far as I've seen, are better initially, especially for like photos on Instagram, but they're not. I am doubtful about the longevity of them due to the amount of trauma that the skin is incurring during the procedure, right? If I do a single pass like I'm doing color and I let it heal and it comes back and it's got a little bit of variation inside of it, I can go back in and just then do my pendulum shading or my whip shading or my drag shading or my scuffing or whatever to build those tones up so they match. And I'm not influencing a ton of extra damage all over everything, right? So that's the end of this stuff. When you're doing these things and you're trying to understand tones and build them and you're looking for a value, normally what you're going to do is start with like a really light wash and you're going to slowly work it up and you're going to probably overdo the skin, right? But as your confidence builds, you start using tones that are closer to the thing that you want to achieve. And like true mastery is understanding the skin enough that you go in, you have that one tone that you want, you single pass it, and it's fucking done, right?
So would it be almost, so let's say you're working on like a light part of a leaf.
Yeah.
And like it's a 3 shade. Would it be better to maybe go in with a 4 shade instead? And then let it fade out into the 3?
Well, that depends on like longevity. Normally, yeah, that's what I would say. The tattoos, when we do them, should probably be like 1 to 2 shades darker. That's lovely.
Because
Should
when
be
it goes into the skin, it's going to have to go through that top layer of skin.
Yeah, it's going to. And when it heals, right, you're going to have that skin back over top of it, right? That's going to act like a buffer for our sun dude, right? Where the sunlight has to go through undamaged, healed skin, right? And then it ends up getting messed up and stuff until it comes into contact with the pigment particles, which actually be up here. Just forgive me. Whatever. Interact with the pigment here and then come back through, getting filtered again so that they can come see our eyes.
Yeah.
So
if we wanted to avoid overworking the skin, we would just go 1 shade darker, understanding that when it heals, it's going to lighten and the skin's going to reject some of the ink.
Yeah. I would normally, like, you see people who are really freaking good at this shit. That's what they do.
Okay.
Right. Like if you go look at Nico's portraiture, all of his portraits are like way darker than they should be initially because he knows how each one of those pigments heals out, which ones lighten, how they lighten, et cetera, right? From like decades of fucking doing this shit. So he picks his tones based on that, like how it's going to age. But most people aren't looking at it that way. They're not looking at, oh, what is this going to be like in 10 years or 5 years? They're looking for what's it going to be like on Instagram today. So a lot of the stuff we see is super, super, super light. Like if you look at some of the black and gray stuff that's more commonly seen now, like that Korean style stuff, especially, where it's super duper light, it'll only have longevity in a certain type of like skin. Oh, Marin, don't balance that up there, baby. Put it in the, I don't want that to break. Just put it in the sink. Sorry, she's trying to balance there you go.
Yeah, I get it. Yep.
Late on the fucking, on an olive jar. Is that pretty jar though?
Nice.
Anyways. Yeah, so we see those things, especially like in those given skin tones, like they're going to look great for a little bit of time, but because there isn't a lot of pigment there and the skin is very, very fair, the sun will eventually end up bleaching that stuff out. We can see that with most blacks, right? Especially when there isn't a lot put into the area. We'll see like when you have oversaturated the area, as it heals, it tends to actually look a little bit darker, right? But any of those spots where we have applied like a shade or a tone, they end up breaking up and loosening up and separating more and lightening over time. So yeah, I mean, like realistically, you should, up to a point, maybe go a little bit darker. But when you're learning and your eyes haven't set up yet and you don't know your tools well enough and you don't know how your pigment's going to age because you don't have any history with it, going from light to dark can save you a lot of headaches. I mean, up to a number of years out, which when you think about, if you do it, great, and it lasts 5 years and somebody comes back and is like, hey, this is like lightened up a lot. Can we go in and do a touch up? The amount of skill that you've like gotten in that period of time, it's probably going to make you absolutely destroy that fucking piece. Like, well, in a good way. When they come back, rather than trying to, and you just like whatever, trying to make
I hear you.
which is just silly. So and that's how like a lot of people actually like in the 90s, especially when you get to see people like Paul Booth, they would go in and they would build their tones slowly over time. So you would see the tattoos develop over a period of like months and years where things are allowed to settle into the skin's allowed to heal fully, and then they go back over and using even like just a single wash, use a 10% wash, and they work from highlight down, right? Where they block in these large sections with the super light wash and just go away, let it heal, come back, and then they keep going over top of it, that same wash every time, slowly darkening it, where you get these really amazing transitions between pieces. So that at the end, the last thing that they're doing is putting in their solid black or 3/4 black to define things in various places within the actual design.
Okay, so where are you finding these clients with that kind of patience?
Most of them are unicorns nowadays, but usually when I see things like this is like a tone built one, right? When I see people come in and they're like, they have this amazing, idea, that's when you just talk to them. I think on the jackpot thingy, there's a video that's going up about like conversations and consultations with clients. And a lot of the stuff that I do, excuse me, and I mean, you've seen me at the shop too, right? Like I will just talk people's friggin' ears off. You know what I mean? And I ask them questions. And I just try to make sure that like they know and they have the choice about how to do this. Like this is the best way to do it. It's going to cost the most. It's going to take the most time. But we can also do it this way. Here's the pros and cons: longevity and healing amounts, pain, whatever. How many trips back to the shop you've got to take, how many touch-ups in the future you're going to need. Like realistically, when you break it down, if somebody gets something that's done relatively rushed and it's like 70% done, they're going to need multiple like touch-ups or reworks throughout their life to bring it up to that scale that it could have been if they would have just committed to it in the first place. So if they don't have the patience,
they want it now.
Yeah, and that's on them, right? If they send you 16 or 18 text messages the day after you finish dragon sleeve mapping and just gray shading with no color into it, and it's not even a finished product, and they like really need self-assurance and other like types of things like back to them because they're really worried about the outcome of this stuff, you got to be there for them.
Are you speaking from experience at all?
It was yesterday. Yeah.
He seemed like a really particular client.
Yeah. He's a super nice guy. It's just, this is a lot. And it's also his first tattoo. So when you get a first tattoo, arm. Yeah, no, that's what we tell people, like get something small, because you can see it, you can deal with it, and then you can move on. When you're investing thousands of dollars in the years of your life, and this is kind of going to be a defining aspect of your human person, self, whatever, you kind of get a little, nervous when you're 5% done with the tattoo and it's so goddamn big. It's all right. I'm quitting smoking right now too. It's like the worst time for this to happen. So even thinking about it, I'm like, God damn, I want to have a smoke. Anyway,
I saw a video today that was like, I'm gonna pick up smoking again, hot turkey. Just exactly where he was 5 years ago. Just no reason at all.
That's shit. Yeah. Okay, we'll hang out more here in a second. Do you have any questions about any of the stuff we covered so far?
It's more shading practice and understanding.
Yeah. Just map. We're going light to dark. We went dark to light. We're going light to dark. And then next week, we're going to go dark to light to dark.
Cool.
Yeah.
We're doing some beveled edges.
Just single motion, right? We're calibrating our eyes. We should be able to see it the same way, right? We can pick up our pencil if we want to. We can try to do it straight through. We can try to do a bunch of other stuff, but it's just seeing how we're influenced. Remember, like when you were doing those drawings with like a bunch of different like approaches on the wheel, right? They all look totally different at the end. Well, if you understand your tones and values, they shouldn't, right? You should be able to identify the tone well enough with your eyes that if given an image, no matter where you're starting inside there, you can replicate it. That's like mastery, right? It's like when you can get to that point, you're like, I understand tone and value enough that I can take this picture and I can, starting at any different point from black or highlight, or like wherever the color is, I should be able to replicate it. And then it should look the same.
So I got to get there.
If ever. I mean, that's why people pick styles, right? Style of tattooing. they're learning one little chunk of art, and they're able to, through empathy, not even training, right? They're just like, I've done this so many times that people enjoy it, that I know that it's good enough. Therefore, I will keep doing it this way.
They don't ask how, they ask how many.
Yeah, they draw a bunch of like, pre-drawings that they call flash, but they're custom artwork that they can replicate multiple times. And they just do that over and over and over. There's nothing wrong with it, right? But it's limiting in its application, because there's only like so much you can do. If you don't understand why you're doing like, a beveled fucking shade versus a full fill versus, some type of highlight space inside of it, those skills that you have there aren't going to translate to other things. Like realistically, when you do a tattoo, all you're doing is reproducing an image on the skin.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if it's old school or hyperrealism. Realistically, you are a realism painter. All you're doing is taking a photo reference and replicating it.
Yeah. This is why we have stencils that we're tracing. We're not drawing. We're turning purple lines into black lines.
Yeah.
Yeah. Art.
Art.
Fucking. Yeah.